Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. New Zealand was once the most prosperous country in the world. However, by the 1960s, our fortunes began to decline, and that decline has accelerated over the last 30 years, Mr. Speaker, to the point where we're ranked just 26th in the OECD World Rankings. We now have a society with major social problems and intergenerational dependency with no immediate solutions. As the Honourable Tariana Turia often reminds us, welfare dependency has robbed so many Maori of self-reliance and dignity. We have an education system, Mr. Speaker, that on one hand generates our best and brightest so they can be snapped up by the world's leading employers in Europe, the US and Australia, but on the other hand, Mr. Speaker, fails so many, with 1 child in 4 leaving school without NCA Level 1. And we all know the statistics are so much worse for Maori. We have a health system that condemns so many to a long waiting list, with only the affluent or the hardest working able to put themselves through the health system with private medical insurance. Mr. Speaker, the founders of the ACT Party, and 2 of them are in the House this afternoon, saw these problems 18 years ago when the party was formed, and they foresaw that without significant structural reform, these issues would only get worse. And sadly, Mr. Speaker, the fears they had 18 years ago have tragically come to pass. The last 18 years have been a tragic loss for New Zealand, with little difference between the solutions offered by both Labour and National. And the PM confirmed this just yesterday when he confirmed that we're actually poorer today than we were in 2004. Mr. Speaker, the budget presented an opportunity to finally show some real leadership, some real vision for New Zealand, but sadly, Mr. Speaker, both are lacking in this budget. For months, the Minister of Finance has been warning New Zealanders that we can't go on borrowing in excess of $30 million a week, and that we have to get our house in order so that we can exercise tight restraint and to get back into surplus by 2015. And what has he delivered? He's delivered little more than a commitment to make a few timid reductions in programs introduced by the last Labour government and then not starting until 2012. Over the next financial year, the government proposes to borrow over $13,000 for every family in the country, to add to the thousands of dollars that have been borrowed in the last 3 years. Cutting back spending programs which recipients have come to enjoy would have required real political courage, which, like the last Labour government, this government seems to lack. But someday soon, Mr. Speaker, people will realise that the goodies which government is handing out are charged back to our children and our grandchildren. Mr. Speaker, this budget provided an opportunity to make comprehensive changes to the way that we offer our social programs, whether it be through choice in education, the involvement of greater private sector involvement in the health services, sir, or by the adoption of the recommendations of the recent Social Welfare Task Force. Instead, Mr. Speaker, the Finance Minister chose to fiddle. However, whether we liked it or not, comprehensive change would have meant the need to make sacrifice across the board. ACT strongly believes that we need to protect the most vulnerable 25%, but at a time when the government is borrowing over $200 a week for every family and will continue to do so for at least the next 12 months, the rest of us need to be prepared to make sacrifices. We need to make both short and long-term changes, Mr. Speaker. In the short term, we need to get rid of wasteful and unnecessary spending, and in the long term, we need to improve productivity in health, education and welfare. Today, the Finance Minister announced minor changes in student loans. Wow. This is the same man who in opposition called interest-free student loans an election bribe of unprecedented proportions. There is no such thing, Mr. Speaker, as a free lunch, and we now incentivise young 17, 18 and 19-year-old students to go out and borrow as much as they can while leaving their holiday earnings in the bank account to earn interest. They'd be crazy not to, Mr. Speaker, and in fact they can pay those loans back in terms of devalued dollars if they pay them back at all. Not only is it not fair for the parents of children in Otara and Parirua to subsidise the children of better off who are more likely to go to tertiary education, we've created a system that incentivises young people to take on debt for courses they neither need nor will use and are then saddled, sir, with debt for the rest of their lives. To the parents and grandparents of those students, I ask, do you really want to see your children and grandchildren permanently immigrate overseas, only to be condemned to talking to them by Skype each night? Or do you want to see your children and grandchildren grow up in a prosperous country whose income levels not only equal but exceed Australia, Mr. Speaker, and are the envy of the world? A country with low marginal tax rates that incentivise work, savings and personal responsibility. A country that truly delivers a world-class education system, not just for some New Zealanders, Mr. Speaker, but for all New Zealanders, and condemns and allows, sir, not just the wealthy, but all New Zealanders to have access to a proper health system. Sir, in the same way that the poor have subsidised those with student loans, if not through the income tax they pay, certainly through the GST, sir, the poor have also been a net contributor to the very generous KiwiSaver subsidies. While KiwiSaver has been an undoubted success, and the cost blowout is due to that success, the poor and the disadvantaged are the least able to make that minimum 2% contribution that triggers those various taxpayer subsidies. Mr. Speaker, the budget also forecasts a significant increase in the cost of New Zealand's superannuation. You would expect that, sir, as a consequence of rising incomes and the growing number of New Zealanders reaching the age of 65. This number is set to balloon over the next 15 years to the point where it will no longer be sustainable. Most New Zealanders understand and accept that, and certainly those under the age of 55. Already countries are signalling an increase in the age of entitlement as people live longer and the baby boom bubble works its way through. Australia's Labor Prime Minister Julia Gillard recognises this too, and their pension age, sir, is set to increase at the rate of 6 months every 2 years, beginning in 2017 and reaching 67 years in 2023. ACT agrees. However, what we wouldn't do is change the age of entitlement for those already 65 or close to it. What we would do is actually be honest and tell those people in their 50s now to give them maximum time to prepare. Mr. Speaker, this is a budget that was an opportunity missed. It was an opportunity to radically transform our growth prospects and to show leadership and courage to the nation. Mr. Speaker, the ACT Party has policies that can transform this nation, address our underlying social problems and return it to the world leadership position, Mr. Speaker, it had over 50 years ago. Mr. Speaker, we'll be going out there, we'll be telling the story and we'll be telling it honestly. We heard less than 15 minutes ago from Russell Norman, who talked about a $2 billion subsidy, sir, to polluters. What Russell Norman didn't tell New Zealanders is that we're all paying more for electricity and for petrol to subsidise those who planted forests, and sir, forests that were actually planted for the great bulk before 2008, and all New Zealanders are having to pay for that, sir. So we in the ACT Party look forward to taking those policies to the electorate over the next 6 months, and I say to the Prime Minister, rather than encouraging people to vote National or Labor, vote ACT, and we in the ACT Party look forward to taking on both Mr Key and Mr Gough at the hustings. We welcome the election. Bring it on, Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Peter Sharp.